All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Skin of the Game podcast. I'm here with Ivan, and in today's episode, we got something interesting. We're going to make a couple of predictions in terms of where we see things going, and then kind of give our logic behind it. And without further ado, I'll just jump right in and give my predictions. And first one I have is I think there'll be really no new large companies that are going to be kind of built in the next, say, 10 to 15 years, except if they're infrastructure or hardware, meaning you have the incurred cost of kind of building out the infrastructure, and there's a lot of sub aspects that rely on top of it. I think that beyond that, a lot of smaller companies are going to become leaner. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of the big companies trim down in terms of size, in terms of efficiency, and still increase output. So I think that a lot of the human labor that was required won't necessarily be required unless it's in one of those kind of infrastructure or hardware plays.
So you mean large as in a
Like
lot of
hundreds of thousands of
employees?
employees, yeah.
So not necessarily
No,
like
no, no, no,
market
no.
cap
I mean,
or
the market cap's only going to go up. You look at someone when Apple or when a company fires 10,000 employees, their stock goes up because what it means is they have less overhead, less capital expenditure.
yeah. I'm like thinking through, okay, so you said
Yep,
infrastructure
hardware.
or hardware. So like robots fall
Yep,
into that, space travel
yep.
falls into that.
And then infrastructure is like
Um
utility, or even like look at Salesforce, how they're now moving away from like you don't have to rely on our UI, you can just build on top of our infrastructure.
okay, so you also mean software
Software infrastructure as
infrastructure.
well, yeah.
I okay. So basically what that means is that all knowledge work or software or tech type businesses would be lean
Oh, for
teams,
sure. I
is
think
what you're
that things are
saying.
definitely moving down into a leaner pod. I mean, think of once you hit a certain scale, a large part of your company just becomes like keeping organization of the company itself. It's like, what do you do? Well, I just make
Yeah.
sure that these people do what they're supposed to do. And then what do they do? Well, they make sure that the people under them do what they're supposed to do. And like so much of that can
Yeah.
be removed. And a lot of that admin task becomes like, think of it as just more interactive dashboards, more interactive components, and you can pull from the knowledge base instead of having to email Betty for her to ask John what happened in that meeting. You just pull up the knowledge base and you just ask the AI, and it's going to tell you exactly what was discussed.
Yeah. I'm like I'm thinking of scenarios in which I might disagree cuz I think like funny enough, I think knowledge workers if used in a different way, I actually think they'll end up hiring more people
Okay.
because you'll actually be able to manage
Because
more.
you'll get value out of more, is what
Like
you're saying?
you'll be able to actually if I'm running a business, it's like you'll be able to the bottleneck was in the fact that all communication and information was routed through
Yeah.
humans. But now that you can have more talent, it kind of bleeds into the thought that everyone's gonna lose jobs and
Hmm.
all this other stuff. I also don't know how much I'm beginning to fully agree. I think jobs are gonna be different. I actually think there's gonna be more
I
jobs.
mean, jobs are
And
jobs are going to be different, and I think that they'll be like AI is obviously going to create new jobs. I just don't see the efficiency of large scale to the same extent because a lot of what moats typically were are disappearing or eroding relatively fast.
yeah. Huh. Like I agree though. Finance, software, I might disagree more when it comes to people that need to train the AI slash software stuff, because there is a small amount of people that need to do that, but also there's a lot of where more people with outside expertise that would have the info that, or the, like the experience that and the data that AI would need in order to be effective in that actual domain, those people would be hired as like
Yeah,
consultants
but they're
or
not
something like that.
full-time W-2 employees where there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. It's like, even what was it? There's the one guy who's trying to take over games or eBay. He's trying to buy eBay, I think it is. And he's like the CEO of GameStop or something, and he goes like, dude, eBay has 11,000 engineers. Like, what the hell are they doing? Have you looked at the website? It looks like it's built in the 90s still. It's like a lot of it is just bloat as far as like what we're used to, and like you're not really shipping anything meaningful. And that's where I think we're going to see a lot of that just decrease, which is also going to allow, like, think of the mass adoption of like major niches in terms of like things we think are like super niche right now are going to become even way more niche, because now you have people that can do those specific things with that specific interest and that specific skill set.
Yeah. I it's hard to say that it's hard to not say like I agree. Because I do think like the eBay thing with the 11,000 engineers, that's so true. But then you also look at like, bro, you have 11,000 engineers, that's 11,000 people that you become
Oh,
superhuman
for
like
sure.
overnight.
But I think that the, like, especially
But they
also,
just aren't.
but think of it this way. It's like, in a big company, if you have, if like you accept, once you start accepting mediocrity, like the standard is only going to sink, because it's like, well, Betty does that or John does that, so I'm not going to do more, right? So I think that's where the, when you're large, you're anonymous, and you're like you're not held accountable in terms of like you own something, then I think efficiency and output decreases dramatically, because now it's like you're not accountable or held responsible for anything. So that's where I think there's way more efficiency in a leaner team, where it's like, instead of it being the marketing department, it's like, no, no, that's Ivan's job. Who's going to do this? That's you, buddy. And that's where I think that we're going to see a lot more like smaller units and smaller pods. And especially also a lot of big companies right now, they're restructuring the whole company around AI pods, essentially.
Yeah. I it's I don't know how much I agree, because I think they just have more experience, so I can't even wrap my head around it. But there's been at least 2 to 3 people that just have said that there's really only like 3 jobs now. At least if you're in knowledge work or coding or anything like that. And it's not even just the traditional button pushing jobs that they were. It's like you're either learning and teaching others how to use AI or leverage it,
Hmm.
put it that way. You're either actually building something, or you're like vision casting and finding the next idea, and then also building, and then also
Yeah.
teaching someone. That was like Jack Dorsey's
Yep.
thing that he said. And he's like, everything else is kind of just like, you could be ramped up into being a pretty competent XYZ relatively
Oh,
fast
for
now,
sure.
because you could learn
Yeah.
anything. Like you can, there was, yeah. Honestly, now that I think, like, my brain is connecting the dots between everything that is all infrastructure and anything that is all hardware. I'm like, yeah, like that's a pretty, it's a pretty non-attackable take.
Okay, cool. All right. We'll go to the next take. What's your first prediction?
First prediction, I think, have you've heard me talk about them a bit.
Hmm.
Ramp,
Yep.
that company. I think they'll be as big as, maybe not OpenAI, because OpenAI is like
Hmm.
everyone else, but I think they'll be like Anthropic
Okay.
level big compared to where they are
And
just
where
right
are they
now.
at right now?
And I think they're raising at a $40 billion valuation again as
Okay.
of yesterday. And I think it is small compared to how big they can
Okay.
actually be.
And why do you say that?
That's a bit more of a niche prediction, but it all goes down to like, it actually goes down into a second prediction. But if you look at what they're doing, it's like they found a wedge into a specific niche. So like they started as a credit card
Mm-hmm.
company. So it's like, okay, let's attach AI agents or some visibility to this credit card and be able to cap
Mm-hmm.
and limit spending.
Okay.
That's how they started. And then they start swallowing up the next problem and the next problem and the next problem and the next problem. And now all of a sudden what they have is a moat, not in the actual problem that they're solving, but in the sawdust that comes from the solving the
Okay.
problem, which is the data that
Yep.
they're getting, like the transactional data, where a company's spending, where a company's spending this, where a company's spending that. And that's why they've been putting out hot takes of like, I think companies are going to spend more on tokens than
Mm-hmm.
they are on humans
Because they're seeing it.
from AI labs and everything like that. Yeah, because they're literally seeing it. And then what they've ended up doing over the last year is they've started shipping all these internal AI tools, but they've turned all their people into like the equivalent of devs that can code and ship product. But they've also begun fine tuning and training their own
Okay.
models because they can. So it's like all this data that is private and proprietary to our stuff, which is private business transactions, all of a sudden is now being fed into a model that they're using to operate things. So like all of a sudden, if you like expand on that, why would I want my CFO to ever use a publicly like a public Anthropic or Chat GPT style model if it is literally ignorant to everything else when it comes to
Yeah.
finance or money transactions or something like that? That's a like open to feedback on that, but I think the underlying prediction on that is that companies with, well, I mean, this, I don't know how much of a hot take it is, but the proprietary data is going to end up being way more important than the hyperscaling, let's create synthetic data, all this other stuff that all the like Anthropic, OpenAI are doing. And I think they're starting to
Yeah.
see it.
Because so basically what you're saying is then ramp is going to become large because they have that contextual layer.
Yeah. And I think that actually speaks to what the actual moat is going to be later on to future companies. Like there's a lot of them that are trying to come out with
Mm-hmm.
their own model, but I actually think that I don't want to say commodity, because I think that like being able to burn $100 million on a test is also a moat in and of itself that these others have. But like you have 6 and they're all slightly different, but it's not like they're drastically different. They're like slightly different. Claude is obviously better than all, honestly. But how much better is it? And then when is it going to stop making those insane leaps that they're claiming that it continues to make? Because if you think about what you would consider as an intelligent human, it's because they're intelligent in like a very specific thing. It's not like you have an all around, I know everything type of person. They're like super intelligent at math. And then when it comes to relationships, like the most stupid human
Yeah,
of
and I
all
think
time.
also like adding like the more context you add, the more nuanced the answer becomes, and at a certain point, it just becomes like, well, it depends, right? It depends is probably the most accurate answer
Yeah.
you can give in almost any situation. Should I do this or that? Well, it depends. It's like the honest answer that gives you no substance, and that's just where the more things you take into account, the more complex and like call it vanilla the answer becomes in terms of accuracy. So I definitely do think that the big kind of takeaway from this prediction is ultimately that like in order to compete in the AI space, ultimately the only, call it, real option you have is to be a contextual layer that is super nuanced and niche within one specific niche, and more so than anyone else, because then you can layer that as the harness you put on top of the whatever LLM you're using, and then you can kind of guide it to be laser specific and give really good feedback within that specific kind of harness.
Pretty much. Yeah. And with I think we're gonna be shocked to how much better these things can actually be. I think that the leap I think the leap, once you have that context, is bigger than the leap from like GPT-3 to GPT-5.
I think so too, because it's again, it's more, it's instead of pulling from a broad scope of like, hey, I read this business book and it says you should do this. It now becomes, hey, based on your data and your constraints, here's what you should be doing because this is what's worked in the past, or this is what companies similar to you do.
Yeah. And I also think that this is something I've been chewing on the last few days because this a couple conversations I've been a part of. It's like there's a guy that I know that owns a software company. They do like 20 million a year in revenue, etc. And he's freaking out because he wants to exit right now. And over the last 2 years, I looked it up. It was like somewhere like $2 trillion of value just like completely wiped off the face
Mm-hmm.
of the stock market in software specifically. But then if you look at the normal S&P 500, it's not like it's a
No.
bloodbath. So it's like it's software specific. And it's software specific anytime Anthropic or OpenAI actually ends up being like they end up releasing a new model or releasing a new feature, whatever it is. So you have all these stocks going like this. So all this fear everywhere. So that means and the reason I brought up my friend is because he's like, I'm not going to get the multiple I want. Like you could one time get like a
Mm-hmm.
20x, 18x, whatever it is. And now all of a sudden, because everyone's seeing all these stocks completely fall, if you're a buyer and you don't know how these things actually work, the multiple that you're going to offer me is way lower. And then I was like, that's actually kind of an opportunity for someone that'd be willing to buy, because if his software specifically is super
Mm-hmm.
niche specific and it has data of over 3,000 individual small businesses in a specific industry because it
Yep.
helps them operate. And I was like, oh, shoot. You've got valuations going way down because of fear. You could probably scoop up this software company that's collected data across 3,000 individual small businesses, but it doesn't actually do
Mm-hmm.
anything yet. Like all these softwares that don't do anything
Yeah.
are cooked.
I was watching
But then you just layer
I was watching,
agents.
so there, I think there's two ways you could do that. You could buy the software to then acquire the understanding and go act upon it is one way. If you're thinking of it from like from an entrepreneur startup aspect, from a pure
Yeah.
software, you might be right, because I was watching an interview with the founder of Higgsfield, and he said like right now the product roadmap should be, you should have, like in terms of like if you're going to launch something and build something and ship something, within the first 30 days you should make $1,000. Within the first 90 days, you should be at 1 million ARR in terms of like being successful and being kind of on the right track. And then you can go raise. Because he was like, in the beginning, like between social media being your distribution and shipping kind of the product of what you're creating, it's like that is how you get started. And then you look at adding whatever you want to add afterwards. And like the aspect of
Yeah.
when and even if raising kind of is necessary as far as that goes.
Yeah. Cause that, like, I would raise not to, like, someone asked me this question because I like So, when someone asks you a question, you're like, I've never even thought about that. So then you start answering the question, and you're like, literally the only thing that was blocking me was the fact that I
Yeah.
never asked myself this. Was like, why don't you raise a seed around to do something? Like, stop talking about ideas and stuff. Like, just go raise a round. And I was like, why don't I do that? They're like, because you don't know what you would do if you had a $10 million check
Yeah.
written to you tomorrow.
Yeah.
How would you spend it?
I also think I
And I
also
was
think
like,
I also
I've never
think
thought
like
about that.
it's the big part of it is like you throw around numbers and it's like, well, what do I actually need? Because there's like there's what you want and there's what you need, and like we'll finish with this before we go to the next prediction, but I feel like it's you default to think it's a lack of money or resources in order to go do what you want, but in most cases it's just a lack of resourcefulness of actually being clear in terms of like, okay, if I wanted to double my business, what do I need to do and why am I not doing that? Like everything
Yeah.
else is irrelevant and contextual. So that's the big thing that I think is like, okay, we literally map out the steps. What are they going to cost and what needs to be in place in order for those to be done, and then do it. Like you're going to realize that unless you're some sort of, I don't even know at this point, but like you don't need to go blow like 2 million in ad spend just to like get the brand out there or whatever. It's like,
Know if this thing
yeah,
works or whatever it is. Like, I would, I would say like the only reason to raise now at this point is if you want to start by buying another company as your
yeah,
launchpad. Like, I would buy that niche software company because it already has
yeah,
distribution, but it already has all the data. So you could
yeah,
iterate on top of that. Other than that, like, you're right. Like, social media is free. Everything's free. Like, you can just start doing everything else, which that's not much of a hot, like, that's, that's kind of been existing,
yeah.
but
No, and
I,
and that actually rolls perfectly into my kind of second prediction, which is I believe in the next, call it 3 to 5, maybe even 10 years, that content and personal brands are going to increase in value. Like that's only going to become more valuable, especially as we enter the AI kind of age of mass content. Like a lot of people think that it's going to dilute, but I think it's just going to increase and harness because at the end of the day, it's a supply and demand, and right now there's way more demand than there is supply, and then also like the kind of delta between good content versus just slop and generic stuff is phenomenal, is like huge. And I just saw this post on Twitter going viral about this guy basically kind of shaming this girl for like posting a picture of herself, and she's like some sort of LinkedIn or Twitter girl or whatever, and he's like, oh, no corporate company's ever going to take you serious and you're going to be passed up for promotions for doing this, because like the old way of looking at things is if you're a corporate person, like you should have zero social presence. Like you're an alien, you're a robot, you should not exist. And it's like
yeah,
I think social media, personal like brand and personal brands are one of the few things that become a moat in the next kind of 10 to
yeah,
15 years. So I think that's huge. And if you look at it, social media is distribution, and especially once we moved from the follower based algorithm to the for you based algorithm, now basically everyone has a blank shot to go crazy. Like I've started 2 or 3 different accounts and grown them fast in terms of viewership of like within the first 3 months I have 100,000 views, simply based off of finding those pockets of audiences and then just really hitting them hard. Um, so that's where I think it's really interesting. And if you look at a lot of the big tech companies now too, the way they're growing is that every employee is becoming a distribution center where they're posting about whatever their role in their company is, and that becomes a large chunk of the marketing. Like if you look at Anthropic, like multiple people are active. If you look at Instantly or any of these kind of new big softwares, it's like all of their employees or like main executives or whatever are actively talking about the product, sharing about the product, and that itself becomes a distribution. So if anyone doesn't understand
yeah.
that, like that is 100% one of the biggest opportunities in front of us right now.
And I forget that there's still the stereotype that content can't be taken seriously, because now you see all A16Z, Y Combinator, like you even look at Orlando Bravo and all these private Vista Equity, like all the private equity now, who's like the most conservative people of all time. Even they have podcasts
Mhm.
and they have everything. But I actually think uh content in and of itself will actually be, you're thinking about it from the brand slash mo perspective. I actually think that it will end up being one of the most value additive like products that you can even make. Like I because I've had the logical train of thought of this, of like where does content go and where does media go? Because if you think about what content is, it's just
Mhm.
communication.
Yep.
Like that's all it is. It's just like transferring of ideas. There was a um who is it? David Senra of Founders.
Yep.
He's like, podcasting is just technology and it's just transmission of like
Mhm.
inspiration or whatever it is. I wrote it down somewhere. I don't even know where that's buried, but I was like, that is
Yeah.
so true, because that's the only reason why you would
Yep.
make certain things. And then I expanded on it, and he actually replied to a
Oh,
tweet
that's
that I wrote
hilarious.
about it. He actually replied like, "I've never thought about founders that way. Interesting."
Ah,
I was like,
she.
"Oh shit, this might be oh shoot," because the thought was, it's like, okay, I actually think media companies that focus on making really, really, really good content will be some of the more valuable companies
Because
like
they
on
have the
earth.
moat.
I think it'll, because, and not only the moat, but also the actual product itself is
Mhm.
hyper valuable. Like, I think you'll have people that will pay $1 million a year just to have access to a podcast
Mhm.
a week. And especially if that is, um, like a super high level audience. And what the reason I started digging and going down that rabbit hole is because AI is solving knowledge work, but what comes after AI that everyone's saying is like robots. So you have AI that takes care of all this software shit. You have robots that take care of all the physical labor. You have people and everyone that's focused on external health right now. You have the GLPs, you have the peptides, you have
Yep.
this, you have all this stuff. And everyone's focusing on, all right, all the value, all the
Mhm.
problems are being solved
Mhm.
externally. All the problems are solved knowledge wise, all problems are solved
Yep.
physical wise. And then problems in terms of health, like physical health, somewhat being solved. So, like, what else
Mhm.
is next? Is like this.
Of course.
And that's exactly what content influences. And I was like, I think Founders Podcast would be like $1 billion company if positioned that way, because he has literally a multi-billionaire who raised like 100 million, like hundreds of millions of dollars off the fact that he was a viewer of
That's
the
crazy.
podcast. And other someone else in the network of that watches the podcast, they met at an event, hit it off, and then a few years later he invests 100 million into the next
Yeah.
thing that he's doing. So like inherently, like how valuable then is
Mhm.
Founders Podcast? I think Founders Podcast is like worth at least a B.
Yeah. Yeah,
At
because
least a billion,
it
because the people
yeah,
that watch it
and I think that,
are
like,
insane.
I mean, you and I are familiar with multiple companies in the space as far as like that have events, and a lot of people I've talked to, it's like they're not necessarily interested in the events, but they're interested in the pre-selection of the people that attend the events. And if you think of
Yeah,
like any sort of efficient marketing, it's like, okay, who am I trying to get a hold of? And where do they congregate, right? Is that Facebook? Is that LinkedIn? Is that X, Twitter, wherever? Or is it in events or in person? And then how can I get in front of these people, right? And a lot of that then just comes down to the pre-selection of who the people are and what they're doing, right? So that's where I think the huge value is. And then especially in terms of content creation, it's influencing and creating one-to-one relationships at scale. That's ultimately what it is, right? And the
yeah,
other part of that is
exactly.
trust. which is the huge other net benefit, right? If you were to sit with David Senra now, he would have no idea who you are, but you would have a tremendous amount of trust in him simply based on the fact that you've spent so much time with him and in the fact that you've listened to his podcasts. And that's where I think that most people don't
Yeah.
understand, because if you sit and listen to someone for X amount of time, your brain thinks you've spent X amount of time with them. It's not going to realize that, like, I don't know, you're fanboying and they have no idea who you are, but you're so vested into their life.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, if you just look at like pop stars, superstars, a lot of these people, they have that pseudo relationship. But the challenge with them is that the relationship is fake, because it's not even who they are. It's like
Yeah.
Captain Jack Sparrow. It's like, no, that's not who Robert Downey Jr. is, or Iron Man. It's like, so
Yeah.
that's where the disconnect is. And I think that for a B2B or a kind of sales or expertise, I would say that the influencers, if you even want to call them that the people, the content creators, have so much more valuable, especially the ones being B2B business-ish versus people that are purely entertainment content creators. Because entertainment, it's like, again, you're playing a character, a role, or this or that. But with the business kind of, or call it education content, it now becomes profoundly more interesting and profitable and beneficial, because you're going to be very authentic and you're going to be very real as far as what you're doing, and you're basically pre-baking that trust, right? If you wanted to scale a company, there's two ways you
Yeah.
can kind of do it. You can grow a warm audience, because like most people have companies that they only meet people through referrals and word of mouth, and then it grows, right? So you can either one, you have to grow your warm market, right, in terms of like meeting more people, kissing more babies, shaking more hands, or two, you have to go the Alex Shimozi route of making $100 million offer in terms of like something that people feel stupid to say no to. Those are really the two ways you can grow,
Yeah.
and that's where, again, to tie it back to content and those things, it's like you're doing the second version where you're building up a warmer audience. You're growing your total addressable market to a large extent.
And what's interesting about that is like, that's the
Mm-hmm.
byproduct. If you actually think about what content actually is, like, good content solves a problem,
Yep.
which, because if you extrapolate on that, that's like a fundamental truth. Like, good
Mm-hmm.
content solves a problem. Then the question is like, what problem is it solving?
Boredom.
Is it teaching me something? Is it boredom? Is it this? Is it that? This is where I think that it ends up becoming. This is where the leap is from like your CPMs on the back end, which, if people don't know, is like what the advertisers are willing to pay to advertise on your thing. The CPM of you already know this, so I'm preaching to the choir, but like the CPM of like Mr. Beast videos, well, that's different. He's a different beast. But like the CPM of a kids niche, or like a gaming niche or whatever, they'll pay like 50 cents per 1,000 views. Or like you'll be lucky if you get $1, honestly. Maybe like 10 cents. But then the finance niche is
Mhm.
like $20. And I think it's directly proportional to the problem that it actually solves. And you make your money off of the ads because you don't want to charge for the content, because the content is
Mhm.
distribution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, what problem does the Founders podcast solve for its listeners? Because I think the CPMs on that, whatever it is, I think whatever advertiser's paying on that, you should raise the price by like 100x, because of who's actually listening to the
Yep.
podcast. And then it's like, who's listening to the podcast, and what problem does David Senra solve for them? And it goes back into earlier what I was saying of like the internal problems. The like, I feel alone in the fact that I'm a little twisted in the head for building up a
Mhm.
business this big. All of a sudden, this guy makes me feel seen. I think that alone is worth like
Yep.
a B for the right person. Because if you like unlock, like, think about it. If you like make a motivational channel for like the average
Mhm.
9 to 5er, and you unlock something that has them go off and create immense amounts of value in the world, like, for them, an immense amount of value is like, you know, They start a business, does 7
Yep.
figures a year, etc. But let's say you inspire like someone with political influence, or like someone with billions of dollars of assets under management. All of a sudden, how valuable was the video
Yep.
that you just made?
No, it's crazy.
I just don't know how he captures that value over time. I don't think the advertising is the direct answer to that. I have no idea. But anyways, I'm kind of rambling. It's kind of like content is software, which sounds a little weird,
Content also
but
is like the content itself is the fulfillment, and you're
exactly.
selling
So like the
air at the end
content
of the
is the
day.
product. You're selling air. The content is the product that you're giving away for free. But I actually think that companies who are investing into product, as in their software tech or whatever it is, don't realize that their product is actually the content itself. So, like you're saying, if content has such high leverage, why would you not invest $1 million into making the best YouTube video possible? Because the businesses are the ones with that type of budget. But then at that point, it's like, what kind of story would you tell with $1 million budget over just like giving the company creator access to a camera and an overseas video editor? And like, okay, you can't spend more than $5,000 a month on building this YouTube channel for $1 billion company. It's stupid. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've hired a thumbnail designer or a video editor that's overseas. Like, yeah, we've worked with HubSpot. I've worked with this, I've worked with that. And I'm like, you're telling me these B2B companies are outsourcing the most valuable thing, which is
Yep.
their content, to someone overseas instead of having the best of the best of the best work on it for price, like to
Yeah.
save on money, which for me is so stupid. Like, I think you should be investing as much as possible into a single video. Anyways, I'll end up going down rabbit holes with this, but like, I actually think the budgets for tokens, I think you should be budgeting that for content the same way, because it
Yeah,
is
and
software.
it can exponentially grow. Like it's not a linear growth. It's the ounce of effort is less, and then you kind of drag out the timeline, and it's going to exponentially grow. But
Yeah,
what's your next
yeah,
prediction?
and yeah, the funny enough, that was one of mine. But not that content and personal brand will be more important, but I think it'll be more important than
Oh
we
yeah,
even understand. Like I think it'll be more important than. I also think that we'll be consuming a lot more AI content than we even realize.
I mean, yeah,
Because if you
we can
again,
barely we can. There's a lot of content you can barely tell is AI now, and it's only getting better.
and not even like AI content trying to be human, but just like what actually is content. Again, it's transferring of ideas, and it's like what you're
Oh,
spending your time on.
one of the
OpenAI and
favorite things
Anthropic,
I like. I mean, anything from an LLM is technically content, but two, even looking at
exactly, and
YouTube
OpenAI and Anthropic
content,
are
yeah,
content
even
companies.
it's just curating and kind of restructuring content. That's all it is. But even on, if you go look at YouTube in terms of like faceless videos, I mean, the amount of faceless videos I watch on like old history aspect, where it's just a voiceover and some B-roll, is like, if you think of my entertainment content, that's a large portion of that bucket.
Yeah, and the ability for that content to then be hyper
Hmm.
personalized. Like this is
Yeah.
an example. It's like, okay, we'll make the vanilla for free, but then we'll charge you, I don't know, whatever X a month, to where we'll send you a hyper personalized episode dedicated to you specifically. But the only way that you can do that is if you have AI to help you produce all that at scale, if you have thousands of subscribers. So a lot of that could be AI generated, but I don't think they would even care because they get your take on what it would be if you train it enough on whatever specific problem that they're solving. Like, imagine if Founders Podcast had a Founders Podcast specifically about the
Yeah,
problems
in
that
your
you gave it
business. That'd be nuts. Yeah.
in your life, like in your
Yeah.
business and in life. He collected that
Yeah.
information somehow. And then somehow, some way, the podcast team basically picked up a book that applies, he read it, and then he synthesized it, whatever it is, and then boom,
Mhm.
delivered to your inbox. That alone, bro, I think people would pay. I think people would pay like thousands of
Yeah,
dollars
especially
per
especially
episode.
his
Maybe
especially
not
his
AI
audience
generated,
where you have a
but
large like portion of high net worth individuals where like that adjustment or fix can solve a lot of problems as far as that goes. And I think what you're
yeah,
going on to is another kind of interesting prediction I have as far as learning is going to change from a one to many model or like a standardized model to a hyper personalized model. As far as like there's only one thing that's really
yes.
going to hold that back, and that's the old traditional educational system. I was talking to one of my clients, and he helps people pass the bar. You know what the bar pass rate in California is? Meaning you graduated law school,
Like
and now
80,
you're going to pass the state bar. Of all the people that try, do you know how many people pass actually end up passing the bar?
is it like
30.
20%,
30%. Yeah.
30%?
So I asked him because we're going through this and I'm helping him with some of the marketing and we're building out some of the components. I was like, bro, because what he does is he basically it's
That's low. Why is it
stupid
so
low.
low?
Now I don't know, like, but the weird thing too is basically you have to graduate law school, which is an old educational institution, in order to be able to apply for to go take pass the state bar test, right? And I was like, okay, so I'm like getting a little cocky here because we're breaking everything down, and this guy he
Did
has
you
a
take the
company,
bar?
he has a company where he helps students prep for the bar, right? Bar prep, and I was like, bro, if I went through your course because it's like it's individualized learning, and I was like, could I pass the bar? He's like, dude, 100%. Like his within his course, 92%, or within his like he runs cohorts of trainings, his bar pass
Yeah.
rate is 92%. Meaning 92% of his
Damn.
students that go in pass the bar compared to the 30% California average rate. Like it's insane. And I was like, and then he was explaining to me why it works. Well, because the way it works is in law school, there's no standardized way of learning beyond that you need to have XYZ class. So if you're a law professor, you might want to teach it the way you like to teach the class. It's still the same class in terms of like the curriculum, but it has Ivan's stamp of personalization on it, right? And then I could be a different teacher and I want to teach it in a different way. And what ends up happening is the way you teach it and the way I teach it doesn't have to be even correlated with how the state bar expects you to know it. So there's all these nuances of like the variations of subjective teaching versus teaching how the bar and the structure works, which is really weird because that's where I was like, okay, so in law school, they're not even teaching you for the actual test you're going to be taking at the end of the day. They're teaching it more like how they want it and whatever they do. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, that's the most retarded thing ever. Like, why do you even need to go to law school at that point if it's like a state run test that you need to pass anyways? And that's where, I mean, you've shown me too, Notebook, LLM, a lot of these different things. It's like to assume that every student is going to struggle with every piece of the curriculum and to go at it the same pace and the same structure is such an archaic model because I even know when I went to school, some subjects I was sleeping because I was so bored because like the teacher would spend 5 minutes explaining it and I'd be like, okay, cool, makes sense. Let's move on. And then he'd spend another 40 minutes repeating and going into detail of what he basically said in the first 5 minutes. And then you have other topics where the teacher spends an hour and I'm just more confused than I was than when we started. And that's where I think that the learning aspect of like asking the AI, what do I do here? How do I do this? How does this work? Repeat that, give me an analogy, help me understand. That is such a differentiation maker. And like you said, we can basically at this point learn anything as fast as we want because it's just information consumption, and then being able to specify and go into detail or create analogies is where it's going to be. So the biggest thing, like we've already started to see the moat of having to go to college kind of start eroding, and I genuinely think that within the next 5 to 10 years, like that is almost going to be flipped around as a joke. Not only one because of the information they teach, it doesn't, like, unless it's law defined that you need a to go to law school in order to go take the bar or engineering or to be a doctor. I genuinely don't think that it's going to be required because of the fact that one, things are moving so fast, work is going to evolve, but also two, the fact that you basically have a mortgage that you have to pay for before you even get out of school. So the whole concept of go to college so you get a better paying job has eroded.
I think that in a perfect world, yeah. I also think that because that stuff is also just
Of
control.
course. Eh,
Like the ability to control who and who can't become a lawyer because my political donations come from these schools or these people that work at the schools or these people that have this massive influence. It is such a
Mafia.
nasty web mafia that even though you can learn anything, you ever heard like you don't need to go to college, but I want my lawyer and I want my doctor, I want this person to definitely go to school.
Yeah.
I now like what you're saying. I now think that that's a dumb idea because not completely dumb. I think there's definitely value in certain school, but certain ones that are structured that what's the word? Adopt the way that you're talking about it. Because the personalized learning is way better because you connect dots very differently. Like I see things in like shapes and I have to like condense it down to, oh, okay, so this kind of works
Mhm.
like a square. Or, like this works like a circle. This
Yep.
works like a
Yep.
car part. It's like, okay, this feeds that and that's how this mechanism works, whatever it is. But I also end up confusing a lot of people that don't think that way when I try to teach it in that way. But I can prompt my AI in Notebook LM to use analogies and metaphors in the
Mhm.
form of shapes or in the form of car parts or whatever it is, which is why I think AI content is so powerful. It was actually I stumbled into that when one of the most popular GPTs, what you know when custom
Mhm.
GPTs came out and everyone was like, "Holy shit,
Mhm.
I made my own," and they were trying to like sell it as a
Mhm.
software. It's hilarious, but it's just a skill file, like a system prompt. But the most power, like one of the most popular ones that was in the marketplace or whatever it was when it first came out was a teaching
Mhm.
and a learning thing, and you ask it to explain what makes it so good at teaching and learning. It is the analogies, but it's analogies tailored
Yeah.
to you
Yeah,
based
because
on what
that's how our
thing
brain
you
works
like.
too. It's like the tree branching of it's similar to some concept that I know, and then at that point you're able to connect this new thing onto something that you associate with, and that's also how memory works, which is why when you look at like memory champions, they have this thing called a memory palace where it's like, okay, go to something you're very familiar with and then start placing items within that room. And then that's a much easier way to basically kind of retrieve them from longer term memory later on.
Yeah. And I um with the fact that people still think that college is the best way to learn something is insane
Yeah.
to me. It is like it doesn't even I can't even
It's
comprehend.
funny. It
And
it's funny because
like it
I
doesn't
really
make
wanted to go to
sense.
college. I was like, "Bro, to, like, go have fun, like, join a fraternity, whatever, like, live on campus, just mess around." Like, I was like, "Heck yeah." For 30, $40,000 a semester?
Yeah.
No, thank you. And like,
The fact that that's not a
oh,
scam,
dude. Yeah, yeah,
but like
that's
all
the
these
craziest part.
course
That's
creators are
crazy.
scams. Like your guy that does the bar thing would be considered
Oh,
a
for
course
sure.
grifter.
92% success
But
rate.
look what he
Like
does.
it's insane in comparison to a 30% state completion rate or success rate is nuts. It's like it's just interesting. But that also goes to show niche teaching and content and like learning is where the future is at, because college is definitely the definition of like the one size fits all. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of, obviously they're not going to want to like, Harvard's not going to want to give up its $1 trillion endowment and like the money that they're raking in. But I remember there was this a guy called Jay Summit that I read a book from a long, long time ago. And I asked him, like, is college still worth it? And he said, there's only one case where it's worth it. If you go to a big name where you have the brand, where it's like, I
The
graduated from
network.
Harvard and that alone is going to open up a plethora of doors, do it. Everything that's like not an S tier is a waste of time. And that I agree with.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we're going
Yeah.
to see to a large extent the decrease initially. And then after that, it's just going to be dead.
There was a private equity certificate from the
Hmm.
School of Wharton, and I was like, it was
Yeah,
only $5,000 compared to the
of
massive
course.
tuition. And like I'm reading the curriculum, I'm like, okay, I could just put that into. I could just put they literally list the
Yeah.
curriculum on the website, and I'm just like, okay, I could just prompt. I'll just paste this curriculum into
Yeah. Have it
Notebook
pull
or
it and
Claude Research, and then boom, I gave
yeah.
my education. So like I'm not sold on the $5,000. I'm like, I'm not sold, I'm not sold, I'm not sold, I'm not sold, I'm not sold. Then it was like, we put you in a Slack group chat with everyone else that buys this. I was like, that's
Yeah.
the only reason. That alone is probably
Community
worth $5,000. That's
access.
the only reason, is the network of people that would be willing to invest in something like that. Like college, the only thing that I wish I ended up, because I could have gone to like a more prestigious whatever it was. I just decided to go to film school because it
Hmm.
was interesting to me, which is stupid. Not stupid, but like they taught like
Oh,
gender
lovely.
studies and math and stuff. It was like hilarious. Yeah, it was weird. Like zeros are males and ones are female. Like it's crazy. Not literally, but like
Yeah.
that's kind of how they thought. But it's definitely worth it for the network. Like you can say you're a Stanford grad and you could do this, do that for sure.
Exactly.
For sure.
No, it's the network and the network in terms of who you meet and who you bump into is huge. And then the last one is um the last one is the brand of the school that you have, like the stamp of approval. Obviously, like the internal of like, hey, I'm a Stanford grad and I hire a lot of people from Stanford. Like that's just how we work. Like you're my dog. That absolutely. Beyond that, from like a pure learning portion where it was like you're going there to
Waste of time and
learn
money.
and nobody will ever know that you went. Complete waste of time. 100%. Not even a question. Which
Waste of
also
time and money.
which that also
Complete waste
ties
of
into
time.
like my last prediction in terms of where I think is in-person events and like training or learning or something along those lines is going to become more important than ever. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. There's one is there's really no like third place where people meet. So what I mean by this is if you think of like back in the day, you'd like meet up at the neighborhood block at the I don't know, like a place, or you like typical of like Europe is you meet in a pub in some like third place where it's like it's not my house, it's not work, but it's some other alternative place. And I think that the with the increase of loneliness, with the increase of kind of time spent on your phone, increase in remote, if you think of it like social media of like hanging out with people is now alone, right? You're in a dark room scrolling TikTok or Instagram. You look at even dating in terms of like, okay, like you're dating. It's not like you go to the bar and you meet someone to the same extent. Now that becomes you're alone swiping on an app. And that's where I think that in-person events is going to be kind of the opposite side of the bell curve with everything going AI. That also becomes one of those things where we want more of what we don't have, like what we have less of or we don't have. And I think that used to be a huge thing 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And then the bell curve now is kind of swinging back that direction where that is just going to increase.
Yeah. I that goes into
Okay.
one of my predictions too, which is the fact that solving mental health
Mhm.
problems is gonna be the wave after the physical stuff with GLPs and all this stuff. Like after everyone drops like 40
I also
pounds,
think a lot of it is mental. Like, the
what
big
else is
reason that
left?
people do this is
Exactly.
mental to begin with. It's like, bro, you're not even overweight. You have no need to go on GLPs, and then it's that. And especially also with the research that's coming out with GLPs in terms of how it's eroding, like, sexual drive, like, life. It's basically just numbing people.
Yeah. I think that it is a mental thing, but I also think after the
Mhm,
aftermath of it, whatever it is. Because for example, your $400 a month crazy gym subscription, your like all the physical health stuff is rooted in mental, but I don't think it solves the real problem. So like I think the market for things that solve the mental internal game will be just as big,
mhm.
if not bigger. I don't mean in the traditional sense of like
Yeah.
therapists and things like that, but uh and you just connected that thesis to like content being the answer. Like
Mhm.
that's why I think media companies are going to be so massive because they do solve the mental health stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean it's just changing the way you think, which is the root of all of it. But anyways, what you were saying with the in-person events, that attacks that. Like that attacks the loneliness problem, which is why it'll be so big. And it historically has been so big, but I just don't know how to package that up all the way other than like a mastermind that we've seen. Like
Yeah.
I actually yeah.
Like, I also think that a lot of it comes down to, like, if you think of why certain things work and certain things don't, it's accountability. It's like, for anyone who's bought anything online, it's like the amount of things you buy versus consume and complete are like astronomical. And with that, what you really like, you buy the thing you're interested in or the information you're interested in, and then the thing that really is like the value added upsell or the value added component is the um accountability of doing said thing. That's what it comes down to, right? And that's where I think accountability and
Yeah.
community are two of those components, because if not, like, if you're not in person, there's not like the accountability isn't there to the same extent. And that's where I think that also kind of plays a big role in it.
Yeah. I'm I think the community aspect, like to what you're saying, in the same way that investing in media and content, whatever it is. Like if I'm a software company or if I'm a I don't know, it's like you saw WAP in their
Hmm.
YouTube videos. They literally go in person, they have you meet them, et cetera, et cetera. It's like content their content's like an extrapolation of the in
Yeah.
person. Like they could put together an event with all their top users and then just sell
Yeah.
out or
But
something
that's also
along
where
those lines.
content becomes
But
like sawdust.
what do you
So
mean?
there's a concept of, I think Hermosi kind of made a good example of this. Is like, a lot of people, you have the main thing that you're doing, right? Whatever that is. And then you have the sawdust that comes from that. So, like, think of, if we talk about this podcast, right? The main product is the long form conversation we're having. And then the sawdust becomes shorts, or like if we were to transcribe this and make tweets out of it, right? That becomes the byproduct or the
Yeah.
leftover aspects of what's already been created. And that's where I think a lot of content comes in, is like, there's two types of ways of doing content. Is one, you're utilizing sawdust, right? Or two, you're creating original kind of pieces of content where the content itself is the original product. And that's the big distinction people need to make, because people try to grow content simply based off of sawdust, but not understanding like the byproduct of that. It's like, if I were to tell you what's an easier way to grow? Cutting up shorts only from podcasts, or creating original short form content where you can have better hooks, you can have better different aspects. It's like, what's going to work better? Well, if you can create an original piece of content, it's going to work better because you have more, you can control the variables more. If I'm only clipping clips from a
Yeah.
podcast where it's poor lighting, it doesn't look good, and the host is very long-winded, there's only so much I can do. Like you can only make so much out of the raw material you're given versus you have a blank slate of marble and it's like make whatever you want out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're 100% right. I also think software will be an extension of videos, like content, like you're saying. Like the
Mhm.
lead magnet or whatever it is, like making a viral game
Oh
is
yeah.
content. Like making a viral video game based for like I don't know if that makes because
Yep.
software's so cheap now. It's as cheap as making
Yeah.
actual videos. So you could make a
No,
software
for
for
sure, and
video.
especially because software isn't the mode it used to be. Like now, if na like you see people all the time, they're like, "Oh, I vibe coded my Salesforce, or I did this, or I did that," and it's like, it
I replaced
might not be a full
DocuSign.
scalable solution, but it also makes it so that the software can't charge a premium the same way they could before, just because they had the first mover advantage, and it's like you don't have a choice but to pay them. Now it's like there's a myriad of choices, and
Yeah.
that's only gonna increase. So now it's more around, okay, you have to be correctly priced in terms of proportionately where it's like, okay, I could remake this, but it's not worth it time-wise. And then also like you need to kind of feed into that with content or make some kind of arc around it. So I definitely think these are a couple interesting
I
what?
kind of want to. I'm like, this is talking about it makes me realize how much more serious I need to take
Yeah.
content
No, for
for
sure, and I
myself
mean, this
too.
this podcast is a
Because
part of it, and what'll be interesting to see is I think we had, like, 6 or 7 predictions here, so we'll have to run it back in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years and see kind of what it turns out to, but that's the pod for today.
ramp goes to 0, I'm like,
Yeah.
shit, all my money.
No,
Oh
exactly,
no,
so
I'm not affiliated.
we will
I'm not.
see, but we'll have to run it back, but that's the pod for today.